It is now with great joy that I introduce our esteemed keynote for today's symposium, Tom Tobin. Tom is a founding member of the Center for Teaching, Learning and Mentoring at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, as well as an internationally renowned author and speaker on issues of quality and teaching with technology, including evaluating online teaching, academic integrity, copyright, and accessibility. Tom holds a PhD in English literature, a second master's degree in information science, a professional project management certification, a master online teacher certification, the Quality Matters Review certification, the Professional and Accessibility Core Competencies certification, and he recently completed the Academic Leadership Academy from Penn State. He tells his nieces and nephews that he is in year 46. He is the author of Evaluating Online Teaching, The Copyright Ninja, Going Alt-Ac, A Guide to Alternative Academic Careers, which is on my reading list, Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone, Universal Design for Learning in Higher Education, and there are some copies, I hear, available at afternoon tea. His keynote is titled Scaling Up with Universal Design for Learning and How to Get Colleagues to Join You. We're really thrilled to have you with us today, Tom.
Thank you very much, Kate, for that warm welcome. And thank you to everyone who is here in the room, to our friends on Teams, and for those of you who are going to be watching the recording later on. Should we do this all formally? I'm Tom. Hi, everybody. Awesome energy from those of you in the room. And I see a few people are saying hi in the meeting chat here on Teams as well. So thank you very much. My name is Tom Tobin. I am a white man with gray hair, glasses, and today an unruly giant black mustache. I'm dressed in a suit, which is not my usual garb. You can probably find me in jeans and an AC/DC t-shirt fixing things around the house when I'm not giving talks. So I want to make two promises in this keynote to everyone. Promise number one, I want to give you language that you can use in order to attract money, people, and time to your inclusive work. I want to help you talk with your campus and institutional leaders. Promise number one. Promise number two, I want to give you something that you can actually tell other people about. Too often, when we think about universal design for learning, we dive into the 3 principles, the 31 checkpoints, the neuroscience, the evidence behind all of it. And people get overwhelmed. So today, I would like to help you un-overwhelm your colleagues. So with those promises in mind, let me actually log in here to my media and get started. So I'd like to formally welcome you folks to the UDL ADCET Symposium. I'm coming to you from, as someone who lives on the unceded territory of the Onondaga, the Seneca, and the Mohawk nations back in the United States. And as we are thinking about what we're doing here together, you've likely been part of a number of excellent sessions already about how to recognize, frame, implement, and assess universal design for learning, or UDL, in your own individual teaching and support work. Now on the screen, that's me at the top of the image with an "I'm new around here" speech bubble. This is my very first time in Australia. And I was especially interested in the 250 or more big things around Australia. These statues and sculptures that are way larger than the things that they represent, like the big statue on the screen. This is in Southport, and it represents 7-year-old Maddie and her teddy bear Mike, rendered at 4 meters tall. Now, we can feel like we are all just very small voices among very large structures in our colleges and unis. How could we ever get everyone to adopt inclusive methods and designs like UDL? Well, UDL is definitely a big thing. So let's explore how to scale it up together. On the screen now is an image of 64 Lego minifigures, all standing in rows. All of them are identical, except for one is a different color, and above the different one is a speech bubble that reads UDL. This is the most common scenario in primary, secondary, tertiary, vocational ed, and uni. Even when our institutions adopt goals of inclusive teaching and practices, very few of us actually implement inclusive practices of any kind, let alone a specialized set of principles like UDL. In this session on scaling up, we'll examine how to move beyond performative inclusion, saying that we value doing the right thing, into active inclusion. How do we create policies, structures, norms, practices at the institutional level that allows us to create expectations, measurements, rewards, and consequences around our inclusive work? We'll use the newly released UDL 3.0 framework, it's coming, as a means towards strengthening our systems themselves. So now on the screen is that same image of the 64 Lego figures, only this time the different figure has a thought balloon over its head that contains images of a brain and a stopwatch. When we encounter the brain and the stopwatch, you'll know that it's time for a little thinking and interacting. Now, here's how that can work. Formulate your own thoughts and tie them to previous UDL engagement, resources for further explanations, or actions you want to take to learn, connect, and expand your UDL practices. I'll cue up 2 minutes of music here shortly, and during that thinking time, you have a few options. You can, friends in the room, take your own private notes for yourself. Online, we call this lurking. Or talk with your neighbors. Our colleagues who are coming in on Teams, use the thinking time to either write an idea in the Slido feature, and we'll give voice to some of them, or you can post an idea in the chat. And I see here we have refreshed pineapple. Welcome from the big banana. The big pineapple has just had a makeover and refresh. Okay, so y'all know where the chat is in Teams. And I've purposely put it up here on the screen so we can all share in that as well. So for our very first interaction, let's get into a systems level frame of mind with the question, what is a policy or a goal at your school that you have seen, but it doesn't have an effect directly on your day-to-day work? For example, at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, there is a policy that no one, not students, not faculty members, not King Charles, may walk on non-paved surfaces across campus. Of course, we have dozens of desire paths where folks ignore this one all the time. So what's something that it's on the books, but people ignore it, or it doesn't really have an effect on what you do? I'll start the music for 2 minutes of thinking time now. Take your own notes, talk to a friend, respond in Slido, think quietly to yourself, post something in the Teams chat. And we'll come back together at the end of 2 minutes and let's share a couple of ideas.
the chat on the side.
Yeah, there's plenty of space out there for everything. All right, 2 minutes goes by very quickly when you're thinking and responding. Folks in the room, if you can hear me, clap once. Folks in the room, if you can hear me, clap twice. I never get to 3 times. Beautiful. Thank you, everybody, for bringing attention back. So, let's see what our colleagues online are saying. Ray is saying, I don't know what I don't know that I think. Fair point. John says, what if we don't ignore the policies and goals? Then you are among the lucky few who has read all 4,300 of your college's policies and things. But Martin's talking about inclusive student support services. Many people don't know about them or how to engage with the staff members who work in those areas. Samantha says, I like my policies and goals. Excellent response, but that's a different question. John says, if the policy or goal is wrong or outdated, we need to organize to officially change it. Ooh, that's what this keynote is all about. And let's see, Elisa says, it's easier to seek forgiveness than ask permission sometimes, particularly when folks can't provide the reasoning behind policies and practices. Many of them are outdated. And here's a couple more here. Darren says, I always ignore the notion that academics are the experts. Very difficult for first-year students to question that, though. And we have a number of other responses here in the chat. Thank you, everybody on Teams, for bringing these in. We have another microphone here. Anybody here in the room care to share one thing or one response to this? What's something that you know about? Amazing. Awesome. While the microphone is coming, feel free to steal one from your colleagues you were talking to as well.
All right, this will probably be career suicide, but I don't care anymore. So ANU has
I can't see your name tag.
ANU has a strategic plan, and so something that, our team is trying to work for, but tends to get ignored, in the big spectrum of things, maybe not intentionally, but we've got 4 pillars, and the pillar that I'm under is being a standard bearer for equity and inclusion. Now, we have a long way to go before that even happens. So that's all I'll say on the matter.
Well spoken, and thank you. Anybody else? For those of you who are keeping count, online 6, in the room 1, they're way ahead.
Hey, I thought I'd share this one since you said you love copyright, but when I worked in the library, nobody cared about copyright.
Ah! We should talk later. Okay. So the goal of our little thinking break is not to show how little we pay attention to the vast reams of policies and documents that are supposed to govern our work at our institutions. Rather, we should note that the amount of information that we collectively label as essential is far more than any individual can take in, act on, or honor. So when our mental capacity gets stretched like this, our brains automatically engage in shortcuts and simplifications. The challenge is on the screen here. A red ball has crashed a straight path right through a maze. Part of the challenge of advocating for universal design for learning is that we're asking our colleagues to understand and implement principles and designs that can take a myriad of forms. There is no checklist of UDL practices that we can show to our presidents and provosts and VCs, yet that's exactly what they're expecting of proposed changes to institutional structures and practices, excuse me. So on your screen now is the UDL that we all know, the official definition from CAST, with the 3 different chemical pathways through the brain that help humans to learn new information. The affective, recognition, and strategic why, what, how of learning. This involves getting and staying engaged with learning tasks, encountering new information, and practicing with, acting on, and expressing our knowledge. Now, oddly enough, the more detail we go into with this definition, the less useful it becomes for scaling up into a campus-wide effort. The challenge is partly the UDL framework and its 31 checkpoints. They're not intended to be summative. That if you're taking pictures, like here. This is also a reminder that you have access to these slides as part of your conference registration. So our colleagues will be sharing these with you if they haven't done already. The total definition of how to accomplish inclusive designs and interactions is not do all 31 things at the same time. Rather, the UDL framework allows practitioners to craft almost limitless variations within the boundaries of those guiding UDL principles. And when we start thinking about why only about 10% of our colleagues at colleges and universities across the world have adopted inclusive design strategies of any kind, we discover a mismatch between the goals of UDL and the goals of our institutions. So even when we simplify the approach to UDL from the 3 principles to a +1 approach, like the jumble of multicolored strings on your screen that turn into neat, orderly rows, what's missing is a meaningful set of practices that an entire organization can agree to implement. Now, the very flexibility of the UDL guidelines becomes a hindrance to wider adoption, because no 2 instructors, designers, or staff members will implement it in the same way. Our campus leaders look to fund and support efforts that can be duplicated, measured, compared, assessed for value. So how do we do that when UDL itself is emphatically not a set of prescriptive actions? On your screen now is an image of a football player about to kick the ball into the net. And the goalie is there trying to stop him. UDL has 3 goals. Yes, the puns will get worse as we go along. We want to create skilled learners who are purposeful and motivated, who are resourceful and knowledgeable, who are strategic and goal-directed. You've heard this language in lots of different presentations and from CAST. This aligns with the mission, vision, and values statements at most of our further education organizations, institutes, colleges, and unis. We want to prepare our graduates to be independent and critical thinkers who have the resources and knowledge to be able to be successful in their professions, their families, and their communities. So how do we go from multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression to purposeful, motivated, resourceful, knowledgeable, strategic, and goal-directed? Part of the challenge is a big thing. So now here are the brain and stopwatch images again, this time emanating as thoughts from the big Merino statue in Goulburn. The locals call him Rambo. Let's pause and brainstorm for a minute. What is one way that you predict we can move from individual level UDL to UDL at scale? I'll cue up 1 minute of music here. Friends in the room and online, you know what to do. Think and take notes for yourself, talk with a colleague, or key your thoughts and ideas into Slido or into the chat. So the question is, what do you predict is one thing we could do to move from individual to at scale UDL. Here comes that minute of music. All right, friends in the room, if you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. Thank you. That was only a minute. But in that minute, you have learned a UDL technique. It's not that I gave you time to chat or think. It's that I purposely designed that time into the conversation that we're having right now. How often have you heard colleagues call on their folks in the room and say, who can respond right now? Where's the answer? And then they're surprised when no one raises a hand immediately and says, I'm brilliant, I'll do it. It's mostly because we need time to actually process. Give people time to think, even if it's a moment. I use the music so that I'm not standing up here nervously going 29, 30, 31. But the music as a placeholder is one way to give people time to think. Before we go to our responses from our colleagues online, let's start with a couple ideas in the room. What's one way that you predict that we can move from individual to larger scale UDL? Microphone's coming to you.
It's getting to know the benefits of UDL. Yep. Is it on? Yep. Okay, now it's on. Okay, so this is very much around understanding what are the benefits of UDL, and it's a tell. It's a tell and bring them along the journey. It's standardization of processes, systems, practices, and either you're on board or get off board. Thank you.
Ooh, excellent. So tell them what the benefits are. So we'll put that on our list mentally for a moment. Anybody else have one? What's a prediction here in the room?
Hi everyone, I'm Jen from UNSW Sydney, and we've got an interesting group of Monash and TAFE and just good discussions happening. We were talking about, I think at Monash, there's UDL as a framework being embedded in the learning management system. Is that correct? I'm paraphrasing here. Please correct me if I'm wrong. So definitely designing or from the ground up, like already with UDL in mind. And in addition to that, I think just bringing people along with you on this journey. So if you're going to do something at scale and it's going to be personalized, then you need everybody to do things in their way, in their unique way, but with UDL in mind.
Ooh, I love that. So allow people to do UDL in their way. And who's our colleague at Monash who put UDL into the learning management system? Sir, are you okay with a high five? Are you okay with a high five?
Because I'll be quoted on this. I'm Tomasz from the Faculty of Science. What Monash is actually doing is looking at sort of surreptitiously presenting the three principles that are aligned with the UDL as the engagement, representation, and the action, embedding that in there and getting that forward, which is a good way to, without telling them you better be on the boat or not, working with the teachers what they're actually doing and getting it in there.
Excellent response. Are you okay with a high five?
Absolutely, yes.
All right. Friends online, I'm off camera, but I'm running over to this gentleman, and we are about to do a high five. Nicely done. You can all go now and enjoy more time because he's just solved the whole thing. Hang on for about 10 more slides and you will see why this is such a powerful idea. So, also you'll notice that I asked if my colleague was okay with a high five. I actually asked several times, mostly because I like to respect people's bodily autonomy. And in a previous lecture at another university several years ago, I just ran over to a lady and said, high five. And she said, I have pepper spray. So now I ask. Let's see what we're going on in the chat here. Elizabeth is saying we love the contextually relevant metaphors. Thank you. I tried to do my homework. I got the opportunity to speak to a number of people who are members of ADCET before I came here. I want to understand the organization, what we do in the various cultures that we work in. So we've got people saying, educate the educators, talk and influence, share simple examples of UDL, modeling, reducing jargon, maybe easy to use and easy to understand reminders. These are all wonderful, wonderful examples of things that your campus leaders will agree to, nod their heads about, and then possibly ignore. There's a little nervous laughter here in the room, and I imagine some online as well, because we've been there, right? We've been the only voice talking about inclusion, talking about lowering barriers. So, how do we do it? Here's how. I'd like to suggest that everybody who has provided a response, there's a kernel of an idea in here. Oh, and we've got somebody, Miff says, Tom, I hope you're referring to the big trout in Adamandby. I don't know the big trout yet, but that'll make it into a future presentation. There are people nodding in the room going, big trout. All right. Now on the screen is an image of 100 students seated in a theater-style lecture hall. They all have their laptops open, and while I would never advocate for large enrollment courses as an effective way to teach or learn, this is part of the reality on many of our campuses. When we think about UDL at scale, we can talk in two different ways. First, about what happens when we make bigger units, like this large lecture classroom. Second, what happens when we move beyond the units into the level of entire systems, whole departments, schools, divisions, universities? What changes at larger scales for UDL in both senses of scaling up? I'd like to suggest 5 things. Remember my promises, here we go. 1, we adopt fewer, broader, more strategic goals, and we measure them in terms of overall learner persistence, retention, and satisfaction. 2, individual applications give way to systemic practices. Instead of effecting change one at a time and then repeating that from person to person, course to course, service to service, we change the structures themselves so that everyone adheres to simpler but broader inclusive techniques. Number 3 is the high five one. We harness the power of defaults. Thank you, Monash, for such a beautiful example. It's amazing how few colleagues raise a fist and cry, "You can't make me do that, I have academic freedom," when everyone follows inclusive practices because of the way that systems and services, like the learning management system, are designed. 4 out of 5, our efforts move beyond the classroom. When we think about, excuse me, formal teaching and learning interactions, that can limit us to just lecture halls and labs. Start thinking about the entire ecosystem of the institution and identify where learning is happening during learners' time away from our formal learning spaces and when they're working alongside support staffers like librarians, tutors, counselors, and so on. And 5 out of 5, we weigh academic freedom against access and predictability. Part of lowering the barriers for learners is not making them learn new patterns, systems and ways of being when they move from one part of our environment to another. And somebody in the chat says, no, we're still on the scaling up slide. You're right, this is just the preview. We're getting into it. So let's take a closer examination now of each of these 5 scaling up ideas, and we'll talk about what UDL looks like through these lenses. On the screen now is an example of that first shift. College graduates in their caps and gowns smile while their loved ones look on in the stadium where graduation is being held. One graduate holds his diploma cover up in the air. This is the image that your campus leaders love to share, successful graduates. Now, when we talk with our institutional leaders about the impact of adopting UDL and other inclusive design approaches, we should definitely not start with the 31 UDL checkpoints. Rather, our conversation focuses on fewer, broader, more strategic goals. First, UDL increases learner persistence. More students who are there on day 1 are still there to complete the final examination or turn in their course project. We know that UDL has a positive effect on persistence because of large-scale research at individual schools. In the handout, I have a link to a research study at Colorado State University in the United States, as well as meta-analysis of the literature across smaller scale studies. The link is to a piece undertaken by the folks at University College Dublin in Ireland. UDL increases learner retention. More learners take a course with me and then come back next term to continue their education with you. We know that UDL increases student retention. This is the holy grail of every provost and registrar because of its positive effect on what's often called the freshman cliff, where students enter their studies but then stop out for various reasons. By lowering barriers and normalizing help-seeking behaviors, UDL at scale affects student retention numbers. And UDL increases learner satisfaction. Study after study shows that learners who feel strong senses of belonging, choice, control, safety, and agency are more than 5 times as likely to be satisfied with their experiences in college and university. Not only do satisfied students stick with us in greater numbers, they are more likely to advocate that others study with us as well. This impact of UDL, especially when it is adopted as part of a larger push for equitable and inclusive education, is the most easily measured at scale with existing student rating and exit interview instruments, flawed though those things may be. The second change with UDL adoption at larger scales is that individual applications give way to systemic processes. On the screen is a composite image of a hand holding images of mobile phones, laptops, and tablets that are connected by dotted lines to people and systems around the world. And we've got some chat coming in here. These are also trauma-informed principles. Yep. And someone saying, shouldn't the tassels on the graduation caps be moved to the left upon successful completion? Take it up with our photographer. We have some chat here about trauma-informed principles. I'll encourage you to look at the work of somebody like John Feeney in this area as well. So imagine just for a moment that there are 20 steps to perfect UDL. There totally aren't, but think along with me for a moment. Most of our efforts to date have been to take a small, willing group, like a dozen people, and train them all the way up to step 19 or 20. While the majority of our instructors, staff members, and administrators remain at step 0 and maybe step 1. When we think about UDL at scale, we design our systems and our processes and aim our advocacy efforts toward getting everyone in the institution to step 3. We allocate money, time, talent, and political capital toward these efforts at the level of the entire organization, while the push for change is coming from the top down rather than as a grassroots effort. Now, a third at-scale expression of UDL is to harness the power of defaults. I love that the example from Monash was defaults in the learning management system, because that's what's on your screen. It's a dialog box in a learning management system that warns alternative text field is required for an image that's being uploaded, reminding people training people, pleading with them to remember to practice inclusive techniques consistently is doomed to ever only be a partial solution to a challenge that requires near perfect adoption if it is to be effective. So there's already whole shelves worth of legal requirements related to making materials accessible, and yet universities continue to be sued for inaccessible content. Everyone agrees that taking the time to make things accessible is the right thing to do. We can look at the sheer enormity of the task of retrofitting all of that inaccessible content, and we can suffer from analysis paralysis. We won't even start. So rather than trust everyone to do the right thing, assign resources to create systems that just require good practices, like that alt text field on the screen or a workflow in your media service area that requires the staff to create captions for all the video produced through that office. This part of UDL at scale helps to normalize the work of making engagement, representation, and action choices. It moves accessibility and inclusion from, extra effort to everyday tasks. And the smiling academic advisor on your screen now, who's meeting with a graduate student and pointing out career options on her computer, is an example of the fourth area of UDL at scale, moving beyond the classroom and formal teaching and learning interactions. While UDL had its beginnings in the classroom, it is a framework for lowering barriers across various learning interactions in which our campuses engage. And there's a lot of learning interactions happening in spaces far beyond the classroom, the lab, and the lecture hall. Your advisors are teaching students how to navigate the systems of your college or university. Your tutoring staff are teaching study skills. Your mental health counselors are teaching coping strategies. Your librarians are teaching how to assess and work with information. Wherever students interact with support services, think of how they are teaching and learning interactions. If students are learning something, even if it's not part of the academic curriculum, we can apply the principles of UDL to lower barriers, increase engagement, and support learner voice, choice, and agency. And finally, at scale, we have to balance the competing interests of academic freedom against access and predictability for our learners. On the screen are two images. One shows a professor sitting on a table at the front of a packed lecture hall, the students leaning forward in interest and engagement, like ordinarily at everybody's places, right? The other image shows two people at a table outside a coffee shop working on a laptop and a mobile phone. Our instructors have the right to teach their fields in the manner that they deem best. That is the essence of academic freedom. As we think about UDL at scale, we should be especially wary of framing UDL as a set of prescriptive actions that force instructors to all do exactly the same thing. Yes, UDL is all about choices, so it's doubly ironic to say, you must, when we're talking about the content, the knowledge, the skills in the fields that we teach. At the same time, we should say, you must, when it comes to making our various systems predictable. Using the same color scheme, general layouts, button styles, text names for common controls across our websites, learning management systems, and other touch points. And Alicia's saying in the chat, in our library, we give and receive training on basic UDL and how it applies in learning materials, consultation, and classroom practices. Big high five virtually for Alicia and her librarian colleagues. Oh, and this goes beyond the identity manual and the glossary that your marketing team have created and speaks to having federated style, vocabulary, operational parameters for all of the base systems on which people are building. Your IT colleagues are your allies in this conversation. And by the way, we already have predictable systems for our physical environments. They're called classrooms, and they all look and operate roughly the same, except for labs and other special needs situations. Why does that sound familiar? Well, a splendid example is the work of the University of Cincinnati. They've customized all of their student-facing tools to have the same look and feel. They started with an electronic accessibility policy, and they worked outward from those guiding principles. Along the way, they discovered that UDL was a framework that fit all of the needs that their policy expressed, especially because some colleagues can mistake consistent and predictable access to systems and tools for an encroachment on their academic freedom. It's totally not. It's important for UDL at scale that we get support for those requirements from the administration, the faculty senate, academic staff governance, and any other campus and shared governance oversight bodies. All right, here are the brain and stopwatch images again. Now the thought bubble is emanating from a giant lobster. Larry is a 17-meter tall sculpture of a spiny lobster in Kingston in South Australia. So let's pause to do some predicting now. What is one argument that could persuade your campus leaders to get behind UDL at scale? You have a little more information now than when we asked a similar question earlier. And I'll put on 2 minutes here for thinking. Again, you can take notes just for yourself, talk to your colleagues, key your ideas into the chat or into Slido, and we'll double check. Before I put on the music too, I want to check with our colleagues. Do we have comments or ideas coming into Slido as well? Not yet. All right, no worries. Friends online, use Slido or use the chat. We'll come into each of them. Let me put on 2 minutes of music. The question is now that you know a few things and we've built on some of the ideas we started with that you all shared, what's one argument you would want to make to your campus leadership? Here's 2 minutes of music. All right, friends, let's bring our attention back here. If you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. Y'all are getting extra claps in. Lunch must have been good. All right. So, lightning round. Folks in the room, shout them out and I'll repeat. What's one strategy you want to do? Put a hand up, shout them out, I'll repeat. We'll do this lightning round.
This is the future world of teaching. This is the future of the business model that you need to make. You don't have students. You don't have currency in technology.
Make a business case for UDL. This affects our budget. It affects our economics of the institution. Nicely done. Reputation. We want to be out front in terms of providing better access to our existing service populations. It's already in our government mandate that we have to reach out to these folks, those folks, everyone in our geographical area. This allows us to do that better. I hope I'm putting good words in there.
Take
So making sure that we're holding on to our employees better. Helping to lower these barriers for learners allows our staff members to focus on why they are there in the first place, and helps us with staff retention as well. Nicely done. Let's take a look at a couple here online, and then I'd like to wrap up with some practical pieces. Let's see, here we go. Reputational risk is a thing that we tend to care about. Excellent. Implementing UDL as business as usual. Ooh, I hear some echoes here. Linking up to the university accord recommendations, with linking the expectations with the how we do it, using UDL principles, usability, the 8 Aboriginal ways of learning. So there's not just one way to get where we want to go. Nicely done. And where was it will save and make money in the long term? Be ready to have evidence for that, by the way. And that's what we're going to talk about to wrap up our conversation. When we talk with our campus leaders about adopting UDL at scale, we should rest our argument on 3 strategic pillars. Yes, I'm resting them on 3 literal pillars on your screen. Access, inclusion, and predictability. Let's examine why these are good ways to ask for a UDL approach at scale, using my own university's vision statement and its expression in our strategic frameworks document. I won't read everything on your screen, but the first strategic priority that UDL at scale addresses is access. On the screen is an image of a graduate student in the library stacks using his wheelchair to get around. The text is from our strategic plan. It's the sort of language you can find, quote, and align with your UDL message. For instance, we're all about providing a world-class, affordable educational experience. It's right there in our vision statement. Next up is our Wisconsin idea. We should be serving the entire state with our offerings. Inclusion has been part of our university's goals right from the start. It's a natural argument for adopting UDL at scale. So the language we're using to describe UDL goals mirrors that already adopted by the institution and helps us to align to the institution's priority, like this group of culturally diverse students smiling outside our engineering building. The woman on the screen is taking advantage of whatever predictability she can. She's on her couch at home with her book bag, textbook, and notebook open. And this isn't the only sort of learner who benefits from having learned them once systems in place. All of us can devote more energy and time to the challenges of the subjects we're studying rather than learning new systems and tools at every step. Now, predictability can be a tricky part of large-scale UDL to tie into existing organizational vision and strategy. So look for the language about strengthening financial performance and educational outcomes. That's code for be more efficient, which means having standard structures, tools, and practices, rather than each silo on campus doing its own thing. And if your campus is mostly silo and not a lot of all together, this makes the argument for UDL predictability especially enticing to your leaders and fretful for your folks in the departments. So focus on outcomes for learners and we'll be positioned to get better buy-in all the way across. So here, in lightning form, is how you do it. Like the image of the concert goers on your screen who are all holding up their cell phone flashlights to signal solidarity with the band and with each other. God, I'm old. I used a lighter when I was a kid. There are 5 techniques that we can do. Here we go. 1, put UDL-specific principles and goals in your vision and strategic plan. This image of people around a table looking at graphs is a simpler version, but we've already got the language in a lot of our documents, so make it explicitly relate to UDL. 2, commit to core UDL applications institution-wide, along with milestones for measuring success. Kennesaw State University, my colleague Jordan Cameron came up with the basic 4. Everybody does alt text. There's an image of Meryl Streep on the screen with descriptive text beneath it. She's wearing a giant fake black mustache. You know, no reason I chose that one. Basic document formatting. Everyone uses semantic structure like headings and tables. Video captions and transcripts, as shown with the captions for a scene with a woman and man reading books. And here's the one that really works. Choosing accessible third-party content and tools. Help your institution to do inclusive stuff by buying inclusive tools. Bring in learners from across the ability spectrum and ask people to test new tools with their mobile devices. And don't buy products that don't have VPATs or voluntary product accessibility templates, and test to see if those claims are for real, because those VPATs can be kind of smoke sometimes. 3rd out of 5, get campus leaders to direct funding, time, and people toward development, assessment, growth, and maintenance of the core UDL developments. And make sure that the responsibility for success is distributed, not just on instructors' shoulders, and funded. The on-screen image of an administrator in a suit offering cash and a clock, they're the 2 biggest predictors here. And number 4, how do we get them to do that? Well, provide options within and beyond campus-wide levels of implementation. How often have you heard, it's the law, so you had better comply? How often have you heard, we're all doing this, and if you don't do it by December 31st, you risk your raise or your promotion? Leading with the stick gives you compliance, and it also gets you grumbling. A mindset shift that seems subtle, but which has profound effects on the adoption rate for UDL, is saying, we will support you. This is our collective goal, and here's what we will do to help you reach it. So move from must do to we will support you. And the last one for today is create faculty development programming, staff development programming, IT changes, media service workflows, and the like that explicitly adopt the UDL principles. If inclusive efforts fall only on the shoulders of instructors, that's not a systemic change, it's just a new burden. So engage all of your service areas to understand and implement inclusive practices within the scope of their work. So that was a walk through a lot of details about adopting UDL, and we're going to wrap up here in the last couple of minutes with a little lightning round question. On the screen is a bronze statue in Canberra of Alexander Bunyip, a fantastical creature from the 1972 children's book, The Monster That Ate Canberra by Michael Salmon, symbolizing one piece of newly constructed knowledge. Take a moment to think of the one biggest takeaway from our time together. What is one thing you want to remember, try, do, or practice based on our session today? We'll do this as a lightning round exercise. We won't put music on. Shout out your idea and repeat it. People on Teams, post in the chat, what is your one biggest takeaway? John says, nothing about us without us. Use your buying power and include accessibility in your third-party agreements. What's one thing that you're going to take away from our time here today? One thing. Shout them out. Check to make things accessible? Take the time. Go from, oh, this is added work, to no, this is what we all should be doing. This is just part of our regular workflow. Make friends in the IT department. When you are in shared governance and you say something and you're in accessibility services, people will listen to you with only 10% of their ears. They're like, oh yeah, you only work with like 4% of our students? Actually, no. And if it's coming from you and IT and the librarians and, they pay attention. Use the language that's already in your strategic plan, in your mission, in your vision. It doesn't have to be something brand new. You can say, here's what we say we're doing. Let's do it in this particular way. So align to your strategic plans.
Saying we will support you instead of do this.
So subtle shift, but move away from you must do this to we will support you to do this. Everybody gets helped across the finish line. Nice. Hi, here and then here. Okay, so embedding things by default or making default conditions where it's just accessible because that's the way the system is designed. Who designs the system? That guy from Monash. Phenomenal power. You were going to say? Absolutely. Put UDL perspectives into systems and processes.
Consistent vision, what it looks like, sounds like, feels like.
A consistent vision of what does this look like, sound like, and feel like. Well, I'll tell you what this looks like, sounds like, and feels like from my perspective. I have heard so many fabulous conversations, presentations, and you're going to hear more today. Think now about what you're going to take away from our day today. And thank you very much for inviting me here. It's been an absolute pleasure. Enjoy the rest of the symposium. Thank you.